I want you to picture the cloud for a second. Just picture it in your head.
Yeah, that's a funny exercise.
Right. Because if you asked a random person on the street to draw it, they'd probably sketch a fluffy white cumulus floating in a blue sky.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe a little lightning bolt if they're feeling artistic. But it's ethereal. It's light. It's just kind of up there.
Which is honestly the single greatest branding trick in the history of technology.
It really is.
Because if people visualized what the cloud actually is, I mean, they wouldn't draw a cloud at all. They draw a fortress.
A fortress made of concrete, steel, and armed guards.
Exactly. And inside that fortress, it's not airy and light. It is hot, it is loud, and it is incredibly heavy.
Right.
We are talking about millions of tons of servers, cooling pipes, and backup generators. The internet is a physical industry.
And like any physical industry, it has to live somewhere. For the last 20 years, it lived in very specific, trendy neighborhoods. Northern Virginia, Silicon Valley, maybe a bit of Texas.
Right, the traditional tech hubs.
But I've been reading through this new analysis by Allies Commercial Realty, and it points to a massive migration. The internet is packing its bags.
It's moving to the cornfields.
Specifically, it is moving to Indiana, and that's what we are unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into the Allies Commercial Realty report titled Indiana, the New Frontier for Data Center Infrastructure. And I want to be clear right off the top, this isn't just a story about cheap real estate.
No, absolutely not. If it were just about cheap land, they'd be building in the middle of the Sahara.
Right.
This is a story about physics, thermodynamics, and risk management. It's about a concept the report calls infrastructure feasibility.
Which is a very dry way of asking, can we actually turn the machine on?
That is the billion-dollar question. Because what we are seeing is that the traditional homes of the internet, places like Loudoun County, Virginia, are full. They are physically and electrically tapped out.
Let's start there, the coastal squeeze. Because for a long time, if you were Google or Amazon, you just built where the fiber cables landed from the ocean. You wanted to be close to the action.
Yeah. You did. And that worked when the internet was mostly email and basic web pages.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the scale we're dealing with now. We aren't just storing text files anymore. We are training massive AI models. We are streaming 4K video to billions of devices. The density of the data has changed, and the places that built the early internet simply cannot handle the load anymore.
The report mentions interconnection delays in these Tier 1 markets. And I think it's important to spell out what that actually means, because we aren't talking about waiting a week for the cable guy.
No, we're talking about years. In some parts of Northern Virginia or Silicon Valley, you can buy the land, you can get the permits, you can build the shell of the building.
And then what?
And then the power utility tells you, great, we can connect you to the grid in 2028.
Which in tech time is basically a century. I mean, If you were trying to win the AI race, you can't sit on a dark building for 4 years.
You're dead in the water. Capital is impatient, and that is forcing this flight to quality. But quality doesn't mean a nice view of the ocean anymore. It means resources. The industry is hunting for what the report calls the holy trinity of data center infrastructure.
Land, power, and water.
Those are the three non-negotiables. And this is where Indiana enters the conversation, not as a backup plan, but as a primary solution.
Let's break these down, because the scale here is honestly hard to wrap your head around.
Okay.
Let's start with land. The Allies Commercial Realty analysis makes a big point about site assemblage.
Right. Think about trying to build a massive facility in a dense coastal city. You need hundreds of acres. In San Jose or Ashburn, you are trying to stitch together 10, maybe 20 small parcels. You're negotiating with 20 different owners, dealing with holdouts, dealing with easements.
It sounds like a legal nightmare. And incredibly expensive.
Astronomical. But in Indiana, the dynamic is totally different. You aren't piecing together a jigsaw puzzle. You are buying the whole table. We are talking about massive, contiguous tracts of land, often 1,000 acres or more, that are owned by a single entity or a small group.
The report highlights two specific examples that really drive this home. Meta, that's Facebook, is building a campus in Lebanon, Indiana. It's 1,500 acres.
And Amazon Web Services has a 1,200-acre project in New Carlisle.
Just to visualize that, 1,500 acres is roughly 1.5 times the size of Golden Gate Park. It's huge. Why do they need that much space? Is it just for the servers?
It's for the future. This is the concept of phased growth that the report emphasizes. When Meta buys 1,500 acres, they aren't filling it all on day one. They build phase one.
Sure.
But they know that in 3 years, their compute needs will double. So instead of having to go out and find a new site, negotiate new permits, and build a new substation somewhere else, they just move 500 yards to the left and build phase two.
It's future-proofing. You lock in the capacity for the next 20 years.
Exactly. And you're doing it at a price point that makes the CFO happy. The source notes that industrial property in Indiana is priced 40 to 60% below the national average. So you get more space with less hassle for half the price.
Okay, so you've bought the farm. Literally, you have 1,500 acres of flat land. But a data center is basically a giant paperweight if you can't plug it in. And this brings us to pillar number 2, which I think is the most critical one: power.
It is the bottleneck of the 21st century.
The report uses this analogy that I found staggering.
Yeah.
A single hyperscale facility, one of these big campuses, consumes as much electricity as tens of thousands of homes.
And it's actually more intense than that comparison suggests. Homes have peaks and valleys. You turn the lights off when you sleep, you go to work. A data center is a flat line of maximum consumption, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It never sleeps.
So why is Indiana better positioned for this than, say, California?
History. It comes down to what Indiana used to be, and still is. It's the crossroads of America, but specifically, it's a manufacturing hub. For 100 years, Indiana has been melting steel, building cars, and running heavy machinery.
So the grid was built for heavy lifting.
Precisely. You have a well-established industrial power grid. The transmission lines, the substations, they were designed for gigawatt-scale industrial loads. When a steel mill shuts down or becomes more efficient, that capacity doesn't disappear. It's sitting there, waiting to be used.
That's fascinating. It's almost like adaptive reuse. We used to use this electricity to weld car frames. Now we use it to train large language models.
And the utilities know this. The report mentions Indiana Michigan Power and NIPS specifically. They aren't just sitting back. They are actively investing billions to modernize that grid. But the key metric here, and this goes back to our coastal squeeze problem, is speed.
The power-ready sites.
Yes. Because that industrial backbone exists, you have sites in places like Terre Haute that can offer a timeline to power that is significantly shorter than the Tier 1 markets. If you can get 500 megawatts turned on in 24 months in Indiana versus 60 months in Virginia, the decision makes itself.
Now I have to play devil's advocate here. We talk about the grid being robust, but isn't the Midwest grid historically pretty dirty? Lots of coal? If Amazon has a pledge to be net zero, how does that work in Indiana?
That is the friction point, and the report definitely addresses it. Yes, Indiana has a history of coal, but the energy mix is transitioning rapidly. It's a blend now: coal, natural gas, nuclear, and a massive surge in renewables.
Solar fields in the cornfields.
Right, and for the tech giants, it's about the path to green energy. They often sign what are called power purchase agreements to fund new solar or wind projects that offset their usage. But from a reliability standpoint, and this is cruel, but true data centers care about uptime first. Having a diverse mix of coal, gas, and nuclear provides a baseload stability that is harder to get with just renewables.
The report mentions that power demand from these centers could rival entire cities by 2030. So they need that stability. They can't have the power flickering because the wind stopped blowing.
Exactly. Reliability is the product.
Okay, let's move to the third pillar. And this is the one that I think most people don't associate with computers at all. Water.
Which is ironic because the cloud is incredibly thirsty.
Explain that to me.
Oh.
I plug in my laptop, it doesn't ask for a glass of water. Why does a server farm need millions of gallons?
It's all about heat. When you run a computer chip, especially the new AI chips like the NVIDIA H100s, they get incredibly hot. If you pack tens of thousands of them into a room, you have created a furnace. You have to move that heat away or the chips destroy themselves.
And air conditioning isn't enough.
For standard servers, air is fine. For high-density AI computing, air is inefficient. Water conducts heat far better than air. So you use water-based cooling systems, chillers, evaporative cooling towers, but that requires a constant, massive supply of water.
The report says some facilities consume millions of gallons per day.
Which brings us back to geography. Look at the other tech hubs. Phoenix. It's in a desert. California. Constant drought concerns. If you are building a multi-billion-dollar asset that requires water to operate, do you want to gamble on the water levels of the Colorado River in 2040?
That feels like a massive risk.
It's an existential risk. If the water gets cut off, the data center shuts down. Indiana sits on the Great Lakes watershed and has massive regional aquifer systems.
Is the safety deposit box of water.
It provides planning certainty. The report uses the example of Google's $2 billion facility in Fort Wayne. When a company like Google drops that kind of cash, they have modeled the climate risks for the next 50 years. They are betting on Indiana's water stability.
It also mentions ESG, environmental, social, and governance. I imagine it's bad PR to be draining a reservoir in a town that's under water restrictions.
It's terrible PR. In a water-rich environment like Indiana, you don't have that same conflict with the local community. You aren't competing with farmers or residents for the last drop.
So we have the physical trifecta: land, power, water. But the Allies Commercial Realty Report spends a good chunk of time on what they call soft infrastructure, which sounds like HR speak, but it seems to be the grease that makes the wheels turn.
It's the deal maker. You can have all the land in the world, but if the local government hates you or the tax laws are volatile, you won't build there.
The report specifically calls out House Bill 1007.
HB 1007. This is the state of Indiana planting a flag. It provides long-term sales tax exemptions on qualified data center equipment and electricity.
And we should clarify, equipment here means the servers, and those servers are replaced every 3 to 5 years.
Exactly. You aren't buying the server once, you are rebuying it constantly. A 7% sales tax on billions of dollars of hardware, repeated every few years, destroys your margins. Eliminating that tax makes the site significantly more profitable over a 30-year life cycle.
But beyond the money, the report talks about regulatory predictability.
Which is just a fancy way of saying no surprises. In some coastal markets, the rules change. A town council gets elected on a platform of stop the data centers, and suddenly your permits are revoked. Indiana offers a streamlined process. For a developer, knowing that the rules you sign up for today will be the rules in 10 years is worth its weight in gold.
Then there's connectivity. We talked about latency earlier. The report calls Indiana a fiber crossroads.
This is about physics again. Light can only travel so fast. If you are doing edge computing, say, managing a fleet of self-driving trucks driving across the Midwest, you can't send that data all the way to Virginia to be processed and then back to the truck. The truck would crash before the signal returned.
You need the brain to be close to the body.
Exactly. Indiana is within an 8-hour drive of a huge chunk of the U.S. population and logistics networks. The report mentions the Midwest IX, the Internet Exchange, and direct fiber routes to Chicago, St. Louis, and Columbus. It allows you to process data right there in the middle of the action.
Okay, the last piece of the puzzle: people. We have this image of data centers as these lonely, automated boxes, but they need humans.
And they need a very specific type of human, and it's not necessarily the software engineer coding in Python.
Right. The report emphasizes the skilled trades.
Think about what a data center is physically. It's a massive HVAC system. It's a high-voltage electrical grid. It's complex plumbing. You need master electricians. You need advanced HVAC technicians. You need construction managers who understand industrial-grade building.
And because Indiana has been building factories for a century.
The workforce is already there. They have a deep bench of trade labor. And then you layer on the universities. Purdue and Ivy Tech are producing over 10,000 STEM graduates a year. So you have the PhDs to design the systems and the master tradespeople to keep the systems running.
So when you look at all this together, the land, the power, the water, the tax breaks, the people, it seems inevitable. But the report makes an interesting distinction. It says Indiana isn't replacing Silicon Valley. It's complementing it.
That's a crucial point. The headquarters, the venture capital, the idea generation, that might stay in the Bay Area. But the infrastructure layer is decoupling. It's moving to where it makes physical sense. It's about reducing concentration risk.
Right. If an earthquake hits California or a hurricane hits the East Coast, you don't want the entire internet to go down.
Exactly. Distributing the physical infrastructure to the Midwest creates a more resilient internet for everyone.
The report also touches on the different types of facilities. We mentioned the hyperscalers, the Amazons, and Metas. But there's also this LEAP district and the rise of edge facilities.
The LEAP district is really interesting. It's this massive innovation district in Lebanon, Indiana, designed specifically to host these kinds of high-tech industries. It's proof that the state isn't just reacting. They are master planning entire regions around this shift. And the edge facilities are the smaller, faster cousins of the hyperscalers, sitting closer to the cities to handle that immediate processing we talked about.
Like the Edge Micro announcement in Indianapolis.
Right, sitting right next to the users.
So, bringing it all home, we started this deep dive thinking about the cloud as this floating magic trick. But reading this report from Allies Commercial Realty, the reality is much more grounded.
It's incredibly grounded. It's dirt, concrete, copper, and water.
It feels like we are watching the internet enter its industrial revolution phase. It's moving from the wild west of startups to the heavy industry of utilities.
I think that's the perfect way to frame it. When an industry matures, it stops caring about being cool and starts caring about being efficient. And efficiency today leads you to the Midwest.
So here is the takeaway for everyone listening. The next time you are driving through Indiana or looking out a plane window at those squares of farmland, don't just see corn.
See the infrastructure.
Picture a 1,500-acre campus humming with the sum total of human knowledge. Realize that your photos, your emails, and that AI chatbot you're talking to are likely physically sitting in a repurposed field outside of Indianapolis.
And here is a question I want to leave you with. For the last 30 years, technology followed the people. The internet grew where the coders wanted to live. But as we enter this AI era, where the power demands are so extreme, are we flipping that script?
What do you mean?
I mean, are we heading toward a future where geography dictates technology? Will the internet of the future be tethered strictly to where the river flows and the power lines hum, regardless of where the humans are?
That is a wild thought. The map of the digital world might end up looking a lot like the map of the geological world.
It certainly looks that way from where I'm sitting.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap it up. A huge thanks to Allies Commercial Realty for the source material on this one. It really changed how I look at a map. And thanks to you for listening.
See you on the next deep dive.
Take care, everyone.
Get in touch with Allies Commercial Realty at info@alliescommercialrealty.com to find your ally in commercial real estate.